Rupert Murdoch, congratulations on 50 years of The Australian, the national newspaper that you created. Let me start by asking you about your initial motives and your hopes. How would you characterise those motives and hopes at the start?
Well, my motives were to create a great paper. Actually, I've got to tell you that it was my father's dream. He talked to me about this as a teenager. And then later, when I was in my 30s, I got impatient and got on with it. Failed to buy the Canberra Times as a basis, so we started against it. And I remember every minute of it.
Well, this is the first time I've heard that it was a family aspiration.
Oh, it was, yes, indeed.
The impression I have was that you really wanted to shake up the country in the mid-1960s. Australia in those days was a very conservative country, the twilight of the Menzies age, a lot of racial discrimination, a lot of censorship. What's the way you saw it?
Oh, I think that's true. I mean, I think what motivated me to finally doing it was frustration with what was happening. The papers hadn't changed for years. Papers like the Melbourne Age, Sydney Morning Herald, on a Saturday only had about 4 or 5 pages of news. Before it was just 100 pages of classified. And overnight, I've got to say this for them, everybody changed. News coverage got a lot better. As for policy, what we fought for, we met it and we fought very hard for it. And that was, I think we were on our own on most of those things.
Your aspiration with this paper was very much to challenge the status quo, to challenge the existing ideas and to challenge the, if you like, ruling class in Australia in the 1960s. I mean,
right. We believed they belonged to another age, and we were young and aggressive, and we'd like to think we still are.
Well, that's what I was about to come to. I mean, what's the way you've seen the paper? Have you always seen the paper as a change agent? Has this been its mission over half a century?
I think so, absolutely. Except where we think there've been changes and we've made mistakes and gone back. We haven't, followed an absolutely straight path. We've made mistakes. We've done our best to correct them. But I think overall, we come out very well.
Did you think at the launch that The Australian would make 50 years?
Oh, I thought it would make it forever. I still do.
Well, that's good news to hear. I guess one of the points to make about the paper is, particularly when you look at the first edition, there's this sense of passion. You say in the first edition that the paper is tied to no party, its guide is faith in Australia. So where does that passion for Australia come from?
I don't know. I think it was a young reaction from being brought up in Melbourne and Adelaide, who were very sort of Anglophile, and the idea of Australia being something, a great independent nation and standing on its own feet. We believe that very strongly and still do.
And of course, I think that you felt that Australia wasn't there in the mid-1960s. I mean, you say in the first...
Oh, not at all.
Exactly. Well, what are the great transformations that you see in Australia?
Well, Menzies, a lot of people think he was a great Prime Minister, and he certainly fulfilled, a very important period. But towards the end, he became a bit of a caricature, taking on all these big titles in England and so on.
Well, what's your view?
But that was just symptomatic of what it was.
Of course. I mean, you created the paper to have an influence, to have an impact. What do you think is the enduring legacy of the paper? When you look back over the last 50 years, what would you say, as far as you're concerned, is the enduring impact of the paper?
Well, the underlying belief in it all was in Australian qualities, in Australian ability, but also in free markets and free people. we're not tied to a party. We're still not tied to any party, but we're not a party newspaper.
Well, I think I think that is a fundamental point, that the paper stands for its own values. It's not committed to either the Labor Party or the Liberal Party. It's committed to its own vision.
That's absolutely fair.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the financial viability of the paper. I mean, this paper was a great risk when you set it up. And of course, in those early days, it was exceedingly difficult. You made a personal commitment. I think that the paper got into financial difficulties very early. So if we just go back to those...
From day one.
From day one. Well, if we just go back to those early days and weeks and months, was there any sense that the paper was in financial jeopardy, that its future was at risk in those early times?
Never with me.
Never with you.
But
what about other
we were
people?
very lucky. We had just a few years before won a television license in Adelaide, which was very successful. And to be truthful, it was television profits which kept News Limited in business and being able to cover its losses.
Was there any sense at all that at the start that the losses incurred by the Australian could actually threaten the company? I mean, in those days, of course, it was a much smaller company.
No, I think I had a couple of nervous directors, but they didn't fight too hard about it.
Well, if we look back to the 1970s, as part of your commitment to change the country, your dissatisfaction with the ruling Liberal Party structure, you made a strong commitment to Gough Whitlam at the 1972 election. You made a strong commitment to the Whitlam venture. Looking back on that, how do you see that now?
I think we were right. I think that the country was ready for change. I think a lot of the things he promised were correct. I think the thing went wrong when partly through his own self-indulgence, but the unions just tied him up everywhere, and he couldn't do a lot of things he wanted to do. Although he was not without faults, and certainly the country was coming apart at the end of 5 years. After 3 years, when they stopped supply, he happily had an election and won it. 18 months later, he said about a constitutional crisis. We took the line that it might be right or it might be wrong for Fraser to do this, but he was entitled to do it under the Constitution, and which caused a lot of unhappiness amongst journalists who are universally, I would say, for Whitlam, although the public was almost universally against him.
Well, the paper campaigned very strongly for Malcolm Fraser, of course, and supported John...
We said change.
Exactly, and supported John Kerr's dismissal of the Whitlam government. Have you got any regrets about those decisions or not? I mean, they did hurt the paper in terms of circulation.
Yes, hurt it badly. No, I think we were right. I think that Fraser was right. Of course, Fraser as a Prime Minister is another story.
Well, it seems to me that the 1970s, if you like...
Fraser had an opportunity to really make a great change. He'd not been in the... he'd been in the previous Liberal government, but not a big supporter of the then Prime Minister. And we thought that there was a new group of young people coming in. And in fact, they, for the first 2 years, putting it crudely, they chickened.
Well, the interesting feature about this is the paper gives a lot of support at various stages to both Gough Whitlam and Malcolm Fraser, but at the end of the day, the Australian is disappointed. It's disappointed by both these Prime Ministers, Whitlam and Fraser.
Yes.
So what does this tell us about the quality of Australian political leadership? I mean, it clearly indicates a concern on the part of the paper and from your own perspective about our political leadership at that time.
Yes, but you sound like a lot of political commentators in America today, or in Britain. Um, we're never satisfied with our political leaders, or very, very seldom. I think we were very lucky with the Hawke-Keating government, the first one. Hawke was a great populist, kept people with him. Keating put through a lot of free market reforms, which no one thought a Labor government would do. And those first few years were really great. If you're looking back at it, they were very, very important in the development of Australia.
Do you think that the paper, the Australian, has realised its mission? Just looking back on the last half century, are you satisfied with the role of the paper, the contribution of the paper as a change agent?
Yes, as a change agent. Were we always right in what we said? Probably not. But the general thrust of the paper through this period, yes. And I think we're now to settle down over many years under Chris Mitchell, and with a lot development of a lot of great writers. I think it's never been better than it has now.
Well, you did indicate...
And the circulation is demonstrating that. And what is really interesting is the new technologies, the digital applications, which we are improving every day. And only a few weeks ago, we brought on a new app, as we call it, for the new version of the Australian, with the advertisement carried right through everything. People are spending longer and longer time on the app reading it. Like, I think the average engagement today has gone up to 20 minutes, but that's just in the last few weeks. It'll go to 40 minutes, as the London Times has.
Well, what's your view about the way newspapers will evolve? I mean, for example, if we take the Australian, will the Australian print edition still exist, say, in 20 years' time or not?
I don't know. I can't answer that. It could come a time. I mean, if you look at the younger generation today, they're happier reading and everything on tablets. They read books, but different people don't, and read Kindles and things like that. But the young people going through school today, I know my own very young children, they're much better at these things than I am. I think it's a generational change, and there may come a time, I'm not saying there will, where it won't be economic to print, and it'll just be a digital edition, but a big expanded one. The digital one you can expand a lot with video, pictures, with everything in them, better than you can in a newspaper.
So what you're saying is the brand will continue to exist. The Australian will continue to exist. It may have a different format, but you're confident about the future.
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
see, people, when you establish a great name, as the Times in London, or the Australian, or the Wall Street Journal here, they love it in all its forms. And it's not just reading on tablets. The amount of reading that's going to be on your smartphone is incredible. It's going up like that at the moment.
one of the features of the Australian, again from the start, was its strong commitment to international coverage. It had a global view, and in those days, of course, Australia was very much an introspective country. We were talking about Asia right from the early years of the Australian. Looking back on the development of the country, are you satisfied that Australia as a country has done enough to reposition itself in the world?
Yes, I think you have to accept Australia's developing its own character, but it is a Euro-Australian, a Euro-Asian country. Must we do more to get closer to Indonesia, to work with them, with the Malaysians, and with the Filipinos, the Chinese? Yes, I mean, look at the Chinese coming to Australia today. Look what's happened to the housing market or the farming market. It's just happening here in this country too. I had to dinner last night someone who'd just been gazumped with cash by a Chinese in Los Angeles. We have to come to terms with the Chinese and live with them. I don't believe they're aggressive. I don't believe they want to take us over. They would like a lot of our resources. They've got 1.3 million people to feed. They've got a long way to go. But I think the English-speaking world, particularly America, Canada, and Australia, and with the help of Mexico, this can be our century.
One of your great passions for the Australian and for Australia as a country has been to see Australia grow and develop as a big country. That's just what you've been talking about. Have we done enough there, or would you like to see us do more?
No, not nearly enough, but I think we're talking about it now in a way we didn't before. The government is, where we have these vast rainfalls in the north, which pour into the sea. A lot of that land is good land, and we can be the vegetable garden of Southeast Asia. It'll take a lot of infrastructure, and it needn't all be public infrastructure. It can be a lot of private infrastructure licensed. There's a huge job to do to develop the capacity of Australia. I think I sound rather isolationist in this, but I regret a little bit all these great finds of natural gas. So much of it should be coming to Australia because it costs nothing. America today is being saved from a major recession. It's not by any means booming, but by some states defying the wishes of the federal government and bringing in cheap natural gas and becoming low energy states and attracting a lot of industry and a lot of jobs. And we've got a problem in Australia. Let's face it. We had 6 years of very mixed government in which the cost of production, cost of employing people has gone up so much that the car industry is leaving us and so on. All I can see from this distance is the prospect of a lot of unemployment unless we get small people starting businesses and some bigger industries coming in too. And we can be the low energy country of the world. So there's a lot to do.
Well, you mentioned...
we shouldn't be building windmills and all that rubbish.
Well, you mentioned the former Labor government. The Australian took a very strongly critical stand of both the Rudd government and then the Gillard government. A number of people criticised us for doing that. They said we were too tough. What's your assessment of the stand the Australian took about that former Labor government?
Oh, I think it was pretty right. Absolutely right. I mean, it had good intentions in some ways, but it didn't know how to carry them out. The NBN was a ridiculous idea, still is, because people think I'm talking from my pocket and Foxtel. In fact, NBN would be great for Foxtel because it would take all those programs into every home. Technology has passed these things now. We have in Australia, thanks to the much controversial, the very controversial Salter here, we probably have the best mobile telephone system in the world. We get 45 megabits or 44 megabits pretty much wherever we are. You go down the streets of Los Angeles or New York and you get about 7 and you lose your connection all the time. And they can't make up their mind in America what to do about it.
Now, one of the great issues the paper's been wrestling with in recent years is the balance between environmental concerns, climate change concerns on the one hand, and the need on the other hand to maintain a competitive economy and to ensure that costs don't escalate too much. What's the way one should approach this? What's the way Australia should approach this issue?
we should approach climate change with great skepticism. Climate change has been going on as long as the planet is here, and there'll always be a little bit of it. At the moment, the North Pole is melting a bit, but the South Pole is getting bigger. Things are happening, but how much are we doing with emissions and so on? Well, as far as Australia goes, nothing in the overall picture. China perhaps, but if you're talking about environment and health and smoke and so on, of course, we're all environmentalists. We all want clean air. But in terms of the world's temperature going up, the worst aspect, the most alarmist things have said maybe 3%, 3 degrees centigrade in 100 years. At the very most, one of those would come from be man-made. Now, what it means is that if the sea level rises 6 inches, that's a big deal in the world. The Maldives might disappear or something. But, okay, we've got to learn to, we can't mitigate that. We can't stop it. We've just got to stop building vast houses on seashores and go back a little bit. The world has been changing for thousands and thousands of years. It's just a lot more complicated today because we're so much more advanced.
I interpret from that answer that you're concerned that Australia might get trapped into a series of decisions on climate change which might disadvantage its economy.
Yeah, very expensive ones. And there's still a strong element in the United States trying to force the same thing. And in Britain.
Now, under Chris Mitchell as editor-in-chief, the paper has made a very strong commitment to business journalism, to financial journalism. There's been a very big expansion there in terms of the paper. I'd like to ask you, what's your own view about the quality of business leadership in Australia?
I've been away too long. I'm there about a month a year. But I would say, from what I've seen, very good. The banks are very sound. Of course, our central bank has done a great job. But you look at the companies that have grown, and grown not only in Australia but internationally. I think there's a great entrepreneurial spirit in Australia, and generally speaking, business management is very good.
One of the issues...
I mean, you see companies come and go, but that's capitalism.
One of the issues that the paper is always coming to grips with is opportunity on the one hand and looking after the underprivileged and addressing welfare reform on the other. What's your view about Australia's capability to maintain the fair go egalitarianism on the one hand and yet commit to excellence on the other? Can we do both, or do we have to recalibrate?
I think we have to recalibrate a bit, but depends what you call a fair go. I certainly believe very strongly that we need a strong safety net for the less fortunate in the world. But I don't believe we should make it payable not to work. There should always be an incentive to work. And I'd also believe, and I'm maybe alone in this, certainly in this country, in the United States, where we're talking, but we are spending a fortune on medical advances and getting great medical advances, and people are living longer overall and living better lives. That costs a lot of money. If the state is going to pay that, then the people owe it to work longer. They can work in different jobs, they can slow down, but they have to continue to make a contribution to society if they're going to live on society. But when the 65-year-old limit was brought in, that was life expectancy. Life expectancy is something quite different today.
If we look around the world today, democracy seems to be in a degree of trouble. There is a malaise in the democratic systems in both Europe and the United States. What's the source of this problem, do you think? And what are the lessons for Australia from these tribulations?
Well, it sounds badly coming from me, but I think the welfare state has been overdone, particularly in Europe. With the welfare and the obligations coming in Europe, you are not going to get growth of more than 1% or 2%, which nobody feels. You have huge unemployment of young people for many, many years to come. And I think that's a great problem. And we've got to see that that doesn't happen to us. And I believe that the government has got to face up to that. And it's going to be very unpopular for doing so. I'm surprised it didn't do so earlier in his term. It's no good doing it late in your term.
Well, we've just had a change of government. Tony Abbott is the new Prime Minister after 6 years of Labor government. In terms of the early omens, the early signs from the Abbott government, what's your reading of that? How confident are you? How concerned are you?
Well, a lot of the signs, a lot of the statements by ministers and people have been, I would say, confusing. Let us see what happens in the budget. I've met Mr. Abbott 3-4 times, and my impression is that he's a most admirable, honest, principled man, and something that we really need as a Prime Minister and we could all look up to and admire. However, how much does he understand the free market and what should be happening? I don't know. Time will tell. It's too early to make a judgment on this government.
Are you an optimist about Australia's future? Given a more competitive world, do we have a future beyond being a branch office economy and a derivative society?
Oh, I think we can be ourselves and be a very strong. We're a younger country. We're one of the youngest democracies in the world. Give us time, and in that, we were given Australia, given our freedom. America had to fight for its freedom, and that means a lot. But I think we should be doing more about immigration. More is happening now, but we should be open to all people. Maybe we need to pass some sort of a test, as they're doing in Canada. Canada have limited themselves to 250 or 300,000 people, but now they're starting to bring in a test, so they're really drawing the best brains from around the world. Human capital is what matters, and how good our universities are, and how good the people we attract to them from other countries is very, very important.
Two of the abiding interests of the paper in half a century have been education and technology. Education and computers witness the famous Tuesday and Wednesday sections in the paper. How important is it for these two commitments, education and technology, to remain centre stage for Australia, and ought we be doing more on these fronts?
Yes, but I think the universities, I'd like to know more about it before commenting, but we've got to concentrate on what we call the STEM courses, science and technology and engineering, and have a much higher percentage of our graduates coming out of those courses than we have today. On technology, of course, we've got to watch for technology. We watch all over the world for things that might affect media and technology, and we see some very interesting ideas in Australia and in Silicon Valley, but also in Los Angeles. It's happening all over the world now. People are realizing that they can invent things, that they can, if they've got, they need, of course, a degree of education, But basically, they've got to have that will to wake up every morning and think they're going to invent and do something new every day.
You're a citizen of the world, you travel the world all the time. How is Australia seen as a country? How is the Australian brand seen as a country these days? How has it changed and evolved?
Well, I must confess that I haven't travelled through Asia for about 2 years, which I've been to China, of course. But apart from that, I think that the English-speaking world looks on it in a very friendly way, but as far as America goes, they see them as a very, very important ally. And of course, as far as we go, we see the United States still as a great ally and an important ally. And I know there are minorities who defy that. And I'm not saying we should become American by any means. We've got to be Australian. But we've also got to be able to defend ourselves. We've got to have friends in crises. And I believe that there are alliances in the world that are important.
Now, what's that mean? You're very emphatic that we must be Australian. What's the essence of that?
Well, I think the have a go principle. Australians, which is the spirit of entrepreneurship, Australians want to make things. They want to make their country better, and we've got to help them. And we've got to speak up for Australian ideas. We've got to talk. I think we'll talk more in the paper. We should talk more than we do already, probably, about Australian achievements, because they're going on. Don't make any mistake.
Now, just to finish up, I wanted to show you the opening paper, the launch paper, Wednesday, July 15, 1964, price 4p, and just wondering if that rekindles many memories for you at all.
Indeed, indeed. There was this Max Newton, who was the editor, who didn't like the Country Party, and they were friends of mine. And I remember it all. It was pretty rough when you think of the layouts and the principle. But it's pretty good. Then we had,
It's got plenty of ads.
Of course, it had ads the first day. There weren't so many there the week after. No, it was a good effort. It was a great effort, and I just could not have done it without the loyal staff, not just journalistically. The people that Ken Cowley brought, the people that came from Sydney, people that came from Adelaide, all the people who run the presses, who do all the basic things. It was a big effort to pull everything together.
Well, the final question, Rupert Murdoch, your career's taken you from Adelaide to Sydney, to Britain, to America, to the world. In a lifetime of creating new media products, how do you view, in personal terms, the creation of this national paper?
Oh, I think that was one of my main lifetime achievements. I hope I'll have more yet, but that was certainly a very important, very, very important landmark in my life.
Rupert Murdoch, thank you very much.